The air in room 158 of the Days Inn motel in Corpus Christi, Texas, is stale and thick with betrayal. It's the morning of March 31st, 1995. Outside, the world is oblivious, moving on with the mundane rhythms of a Friday. Inside this cheap, anonymous room, a friendship is dying, and with it, the brightest star in the Latin music universe is about to be extinguished. Across from each other are two women locked in a confrontation that has been simmering for weeks. One is Selena Quintanilla Perez. At 23, she is a cultural phenomenon, the undisputed queen of Tejano music. She is vibrant, beautiful, a Grammy-winning artist on the absolute precipice of a massive English-language crossover that promises to make her a global superstar. She is here in this drab motel room not as a queen but as a concerned friend and a frustrated employer trying to retrieve financial documents that have gone missing, trying to make sense of a trust that has been shattered. The other woman is Yolanda Saldívar. She is 34, a frumpy, unassuming nurse who transformed herself from an obsessive fan into the president of Selena's fan club, and then, improbably, into the manager of Selena's clothing boutiques. She became a gatekeeper, a confidant, a member of the inner circle. She worshipped Selena, or so it seemed. Now she is a cornered animal, her web of deceit and embezzlement unraveling around her. In her hand, she clutches a .38 caliber revolver. The argument escalates. Selena, a young woman who has commanded stadium-sized crowds, is now trying to command a single unstable employee. She finally firmly severs the ties. She turns to leave, her back to the woman she once trusted implicitly. A single deafening shot rings out. The bullet tears through her right shoulder, severing an artery. It is a fatal wound, but in this final horrific moment, Selena's incredible strength, the same grit that powered her from dusty Texas dance halls to the Grammy stage, takes over. She does not collapse. She runs, clutching her chest, a trail of blood marking her path. She stumbles toward the motel lobby, screaming, "Help me! Help me! I've been shot!" Before she collapses from a catastrophic loss of blood, she uses her final breaths not to cry out in pain, but to identify her killer and the room where it happened. Yolanda, room 158. It is her last act, a final desperate attempt to impose order on an act of pure, senseless chaos. The death of Selena Quintanilla was not the sad, slow fade of a star undone by the usual demons of fame. It was not an overdose or a fiery car crash. It was a brutal, intimate act of violence, a murder that felt like an assassination. To understand how a beloved music icon ended up bleeding to death on the cold floor of a budget motel, we must go back to the beginning, to a story not of glamour and excess, but of family, ambition, and the relentless, grinding pursuit of a second-hand dream. Before there was Selena the superstar, there was Abraham Quintanilla Jr., a man with his own musical dreams. In the 1950s and 60s, Abraham was the lead singer of Los Dinos, a doo-wop group from Corpus Christi. They had a modicum of regional success, recording a handful of records, but they never broke through. The dream faded under the harsh realities of raising a family and the pervasive discrimination against Mexican-American artists trying to sing English-language rock and roll. Abraham packed away his ambitions, taking a steady job at Dow Chemical to support his wife, Marcella, and their growing family. The dream, he thought, was dead. But it was only dormant, waiting for a new vessel. That vessel was born on April 16, 1971, his youngest child, Selena. From a very young age, she was a magnetic, joyful child. But it was Abraham who first discovered the raw, untamed power of her voice. The story, now part of Tejano folklore, is that when Selena was just 6 years old, Abraham was teaching his son, A.B., to play the guitar. Selena picked up a songbook and began to sing, and Abraham was thunderstruck. He heard not the voice of a child, but a pitch-perfect, unnervingly powerful instrument. In that moment, his own buried dream roared back to life. He saw a second chance. He saw a star. This was not a casual discovery. It became an obsession. Abraham immediately formed a new family band. A.B., then a teenager, was put on bass. His older daughter, Suzette, who had no interest in music, was forced to learn the drums. He said, "You're gonna play the drums," Suzette would later recall. And that was it. You didn't question Dad. And at the center of it all was little Selena, a 6-year-old prodigy tasked with resurrecting her father's ambitions. The group was christened Selena y los Dinos, Selena and the Guys, a direct echo of Abraham's own past. Their early years were a relentless grind. Abraham quit his job, opened a Mexican restaurant called Papagayos where the family band would perform, and poured everything he had into their career. The restaurant soon failed. The family lost their home, and they were forced to move in with relatives. They were, for a time, living on food stamps. But Abraham's belief in Selena's talent was absolute. He bought a battered old tour bus, which the family affectionately nicknamed Big Bertha, and they hit the road, becoming a full-time touring act. Life in Big Bertha was not glamorous. It was cramped, hot, and often broke down. The family of 5, along with their equipment, crisscrossed Texas, playing at dusty dance halls, weddings, quinceañeras, any place that would have them. They would often be paid just enough for gas and food. This was Selena's childhood. While other kids were in school and playing with friends, she was on the road performing late into the night and doing her schoolwork by correspondence. The dynamic within the family was forged in this crucible. Abraham was the undisputed patriarch, the manager, the producer, the driving force. His regime was one of intense, loving, and often suffocating control. He was a demanding mentor, pushing Selena to perfect her craft. He taught her to sing in Spanish, a language she didn't speak fluently, insisting that her roots were the key to her identity and her audience. He drilled the band for hours, critiquing every note. His word was law. His control was born of 2 things: a fierce, protective love for his daughter and a deep-seated fear born of his own experiences with discrimination. He was terrified that the music industry would corrupt her, or that a misstep would derail the career he was so carefully building. He saw threats everywhere. He dictated what she wore, who she associated with, and what she sang. It was a benevolent dictatorship, but a dictatorship nonetheless. For Selena, this was the only life she knew. She was a dutiful daughter, eager to please the father who had sacrificed everything for her dream, a dream that was, in reality, his own. This period was foundational. It instilled in Selena an incredible work ethic and a deep understanding of the business. She wasn't just a singer being handed songs. She was an integral part of a family enterprise, witnessing firsthand the sacrifices and the struggles. It also created a powerful bond between her and her audience. The Tejano community in Texas saw her not as a distant star, but as one of their own, a girl growing up in front of them, singing the songs of their lives. By the mid-1980s, the years of grinding it out on the road began to pay off. Selena y los Dinos were no longer just a weekend wedding band. They were gaining regional recognition, winning awards at the local Tejano Music Awards, and building a fiercely loyal fan base. The little girl with the powerful voice was becoming a young woman, a charismatic performer whose stage presence was becoming as electrifying as her vocals. They were on the cusp of breaking out, but they were still very much a family operation, running on fumes, faith, and the relentless, unwavering ambition of Abraham Quintanilla. The dream was no longer just his, it was becoming hers too, and it was about to get bigger than any of them could have ever imagined. By the late 1980s, the name Selena y los Dinos was becoming synonymous with the future of Tejano music. The grueling years on Big Bertha had forged them into a tight professional unit, with Selena's once prodigious childhood voice now blossoming into a powerful, emotive instrument. Her charisma, a natural girl-next-door warmth mixed with an explosive on-stage energy, was undeniable. But their ascent was not without obstacles. The world of Tejano music was, at the time, overwhelmingly male-dominated. It was a scene of tough, macho frontmen in cowboy hats. Promoters and radio station managers were skeptical, often telling Abraham that a female-fronted Tejano act would never succeed. "A woman can't be the lead," they'd say, "and people won't accept it." Selena did not just defy this prejudice, she shattered it. She walked onto stages across Texas and proved them all wrong, not by imitating her male counterparts, but by creating something entirely new. Her brother, A.B. Quintanilla, now the band's primary songwriter and producer, began to craft a sound that was both traditional and revolutionary. He fused the classic accordion-driven rhythms of cumbia with modern synths, pop hooks, and R&B influences. It was a sound that respected the genre's roots while pushing it firmly into the future. At the center of this musical evolution was Selena herself, who was becoming a creative force in her own right. She began to design her own stage outfits, challenging the conservative norms of the Tejano scene. She sketched her own designs for the iconic, often jewel-encrusted bustiers, high-waisted pants and bell-bottoms that would become her trademark. This wasn't just fashion, it was a statement. Her look was bold, glamorous, and unapologetically sexy, but it was always presented with a sense of fun and self-confidence, never just for pure objectification. She was celebrating her body and her femininity in a way that was empowering for her legions of young female fans. She was both accessible and aspirational, a combination that made her a cultural phenomenon. In 1987, at just 15 years old, she won the Tejano Music Award for Female Vocalist of the Year. It was a distinction she would go on to win for the next 9 consecutive years, a testament to her complete and utter dominance of the genre. This victory caught the attention of the major labels. In 1989, Jose Bahar, the head of the newly formed EMI Latin, attended one of her performances. He was looking for the next Latin superstar, a Latin Gloria Estefan. He was so captivated by Selena's performance that he signed Selena y los Dinos on the spot. It was a landmark deal, promising the crossover appeal that Abraham had dreamed of for decades. With the backing of a major label, their world expanded. The band needed a new, more dynamic guitarist to complement their evolving, rock-influenced sound. In 1990, they hired Chris Perez, a talented, long-haired heavy metal guitarist from San Antonio. Perez was everything Abraham Quintanilla distrusted. He was a rocker with a rebellious streak, a world away from the clean-cut image Abraham carefully curated for the band. To Abraham, he was a threat, a potential bad influence on his sheltered superstar daughter. What Abraham feared most soon came to pass. On the road, in the close confines of the new tour bus, a secret romance blossomed between Selena and Chris. It was a classic tale of forbidden love. They would steal moments together, hiding their relationship from her ever-watchful father. For Selena, who had spent her entire life under Abraham's control, her love for Chris was her first real act of rebellion, a claim to her own life and her own heart. The band knew, her sister Suzette knew, but they all kept the secret, terrified of Abraham's reaction. Eventually, Abraham found out, and his reaction was explosive. In a furious, tear-filled confrontation on the side of a highway, he pulled the bus over, fired Chris on the spot, and forbade Selena from ever seeing him again. He saw it not as his daughter falling in love, but as a betrayal, a threat to the family unit and the multi-million-dollar enterprise he had built around her. He told her that if she continued the relationship, he would disband the group. It was the ultimate ultimatum, forcing her to choose between her family and her love. For a time, she was heartbroken, separated from Chris, but her love for him was real. On April 2, 1992, Selena, then 20, and Chris, 22, made a radical decision. They eloped, getting married secretly at a courthouse in Nueces County. When the news broke, Abraham was initially devastated, but seeing his daughter's happiness and determination, and faced with the reality that what was done, he eventually relented. He accepted Chris back into the family and, crucially, back into the band. Selena had successfully navigated her first major personal battle, proving that she could be both a dutiful daughter and a woman in charge of her own life. While her personal life was undergoing this turmoil, her professional career was reaching stratospheric heights. Her albums like Ven Conmigo and Entre a mi Mundo were selling hundreds of thousands of copies. She was a superstar not just in Texas, but across the entire United States and, increasingly, in Mexico, where she was embraced as a national treasure. The concerts grew from dance halls to arenas, culminating in a legendary record-breaking performance at the Houston Astrodome in 1995, where she performed for over 61,000 screaming fans in her iconic purple jumpsuit. In 1994, she achieved a monumental milestone. She won a Grammy Award for Best Mexican-American Album for her album Selena Live. It was the ultimate validation, a recognition of her talent from the mainstream American music industry. The crossover dream, the one Abraham had envisioned for her since she was 6 years old, was now within reach. It was during this period of explosive growth that another figure entered their lives, a woman who, at first, seemed like a godsend. Her name was Yolanda Saldívar. A nurse from San Antonio, Saldívar had approached Abraham with a singular, obsessive passion. She wanted to start and run Selena's official fan club. Abraham, initially wary, was eventually won over by her persistence and her seemingly selfless devotion. Yolanda was incredibly effective. She grew the fan club to thousands of members, managed it with an iron fist, and made herself the ultimate gatekeeper to Selena. She wasn't just a fan, she was the #1 fan, and she made sure everyone knew it. Selena, a deeply kind and trusting person, was touched by Yolanda's devotion. A friendship began to form, and Yolanda started to insinuate herself not just into Selena's business but into her life, becoming a constant, ever-present companion. She had worked her way into the heart of the Quintanilla family's inner circle. By 1994, Selena was more than just a musician. She was a rapidly expanding brand. The crossover album, the Holy Grail she and her father had been working towards for years, was officially in production. It was a project of immense pressure and expectation. She was spending countless hours in the studio working with a team of top-tier pop producers and songwriters, carefully crafting an album that would introduce her to a mainstream American audience without alienating her loyal Tejano fanbase. The album, to be titled Dreaming of You, was meant to be her coronation, the final step in her transformation from a regional queen to a global icon. Alongside this monumental musical undertaking, another of Selena's long-held dreams was coming to fruition, a career in fashion. She had always been passionate about design, creating her own iconic stage looks. Now she wanted to translate that passion into a tangible business. With her father's blessing and financial backing, she launched a new enterprise, a pair of boutique clothing stores complete with full-service salons called Selena, etc. The flagship store opened in Corpus Christi, with another following in San Antonio. It was a bold, ambitious venture, a testament to her growing confidence as a businesswoman. But this new venture created a problem. The Quintanilla family, already stretched thin managing her massive music career, needed someone they could trust to oversee the day-to-day operations of the boutiques. Selena had the perfect candidate, her devoted friend and fan club president, Yolanda Saldívar. To Selena, it was a logical choice. Yolanda was organized, fiercely loyal, and had already proven her effectiveness with the fan club. Selena saw it as a way to reward a friend and empower someone she trusted. Abraham, however, was hesitant. He was a shrewd businessman and a deeply skeptical man. He saw Saldívar as a starstruck fan, not a qualified business manager, but he was outvoted by his daughter's affection and trust. In late 1994, Yolanda Saldívar was officially promoted from fan club president to the manager of Selena's burgeoning fashion empire. The promotion gave Saldívar unprecedented access and power. She was no longer just an associate, she was an integral part of Selena's daily life and business operations. She controlled the boutique's finances, managed the employees, and acted as a gatekeeper, further cementing her position as Selena's indispensable right-hand woman. To the outside world, she was the picture of devotion. But beneath the surface, a darker pattern was emerging. Employees at the boutiques began to complain about Yolanda's behavior. They described her as volatile, manipulative, and tyrannical. She would fire people on a whim, create a toxic work environment of fear and suspicion, and speak of Selena with an unnerving, possessive intensity. More alarmingly, Selena's father and other family members began to notice financial irregularities. The boutiques, despite being popular, were consistently losing money. A.B. Quintanilla and Suzette began hearing from fan club members who had sent in their membership fees but had never received the promised merchandise packages, which included a t-shirt and an autographed photo. The money seemed to be vanishing into thin air. At the same time, Selena began to confide in family members that her relationship with Yolanda was becoming strained. Yolanda had grown possessive and controlling, attempting to isolate Selena from her other friends and even from her own family. She would lie about conversations and fabricate stories to create rifts, all in an attempt to make herself the sole trusted figure in Selena's life. Abraham, his initial suspicions now fully aroused, began a quiet investigation. What he discovered confirmed his worst fears. He found a series of canceled checks and financial records that proved Saldívar had been systematically embezzling money from both the fan club and the boutiques, writing checks to herself and forging documents to cover her tracks. The total amount was in the tens of thousands of dollars. The confrontation was swift and brutal. On March 9, 1995, Abraham, accompanied by Suzette and A.B., called a meeting with Selena and Yolanda. He laid out the evidence, the forged checks, the fraudulent bank statements. He called Saldívar nothing but a common thief. Yolanda's reaction was not one of remorse, but of pure denial and emotional manipulation. She insisted she was innocent, that the documents were wrong, that she would never betray Selena. For Selena, the moment was devastating. She was caught in an impossible position, trapped between her father's undeniable evidence and her deep personal loyalty to the woman she considered one of her closest friends. The betrayal was a profound emotional blow. Throughout her life, she had been surrounded and protected by her family. Yolanda was one of the first people from outside that she had truly let in, and that trust had been violated in the cruelest way. Despite the evidence, Selena was hesitant to sever ties completely. Part of it was her innate kindness and her difficulty in believing that a friend could be capable of such deceit. But there was also a practical and more pressing problem. Yolanda was in possession of crucial financial records, bank statements, and tax documents that were essential for the boutiques and for Selena's personal finances. In the weeks following the confrontation, Selena made several attempts to retrieve these documents from Yolanda, who continuously created a series of bizarre excuses and delays. Yolanda claimed she had been physically and sexually assaulted in Mexico and needed time to recover. She claimed the documents were with her accountants. Each excuse was a delaying tactic, a way to maintain her hold on Selena and avoid the inevitable final severing of their relationship. The tension escalated. Selena was frustrated and hurt, trying to manage this painful personal crisis while simultaneously putting the finishing touches on Dreaming of You, the album that held the key to her entire future. She was on the verge of realizing her biggest dream, but the web of deceit woven by her biggest fan was closing in around her, leading inexorably to a final tragic confrontation in a cheap motel room in Corpus Christi. The final 24 hours of Selena Quintanilla's life were a tragic cascade of good intentions and fatal decisions, a desperate attempt to bring a painful chapter to a clean close. On the evening of March 30th, 1995, Yolanda Saldívar called Selena from her room at the Days Inn motel in Corpus Christi. She was frantic, claiming that the crucial financial documents Selena needed had been left behind in Mexico and that she had been brutally raped during her trip there. It was a dramatic, manipulative story designed to elicit sympathy and further delay the inevitable. Selena, ever compassionate, was deeply concerned. Despite her own family's warnings and her growing suspicions, she agreed to meet Yolanda, first at the hospital and then at her motel room, to offer support and finally retrieve the documents. That night, Selena, accompanied by her husband, Chris Perez, went to the hospital where Yolanda was being examined. The examination revealed no evidence of assault. It was a lie. The web of deceit was becoming more and more transparent. Frustrated but still determined to end the relationship cleanly, Selena drove Yolanda back to the Days Inn. The next morning, on March 31st, Selena woke up early. She told Chris she had to go back to the motel one last time to fire Yolanda in person and, most importantly, to get the last of the financial records. It was a meeting she insisted on attending alone, a decision that would prove fatal. She arrived at room 158 of the Days Inn shortly after 9 a.m. For the next 2 hours, the two women were locked in an intense, emotional argument. Selena, finally accepting the full scope of the betrayal, was firm. She told Yolanda she could no longer be trusted and that their professional and personal relationship was over. This was the moment Yolanda had been dreading, the final rejection, the severing of the connection to the person who had become the entire focus of her obsessive world. From a bag, she pulled out a .38 Taurus Model 85 revolver she had recently purchased. What happened next is a matter of tragic record. Yolanda would later claim she was suicidal and that the gun went off by accident. The evidence suggests a far more deliberate act. As Selena turned to leave the room, a final act of walking away, Yolanda raised the gun and fired a single shot. The bullet entered Selena's back near her right shoulder blade, tearing through her body and severing the subclavian artery, a major vessel that supplies blood to the arm and brain. The wound was catastrophic. But in this final horrific moment, Selena's incredible strength and will to live took over. She did not collapse. Screaming, she staggered out of the room and began a desperate 390-foot run towards the motel lobby, leaving a trail of blood on the concrete walkway. She was a mortally wounded animal, running on pure adrenaline and instinct. Yolanda followed her out of the room, the gun still in her hand, screaming, "Bitch," after the bleeding superstar before calmly walking back to her red pickup truck in the parking lot. Selena burst into the motel lobby and collapsed onto the floor in front of the front desk clerk. Even in her final moments, her mind was clear. Before succumbing to the massive blood loss, she used her last breaths not to cry out in pain, but to identify her killer and the room where the crime had occurred. Yolanda, room 158. It was her last act, a final desperate attempt to impose order on an act of pure, senseless chaos. The employees in the lobby frantically called 911. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but it was too late. The damage was too severe. Selena Quintanilla Perez was pronounced dead on arrival at Corpus Christi Memorial Hospital at 1:05 p.m. from massive blood loss and cardiac arrest. She was 23 years old. As the news of the shooting began to spread, a surreal and tragic spectacle unfolded in the motel parking lot. Yolanda Saldívar, having been cornered by police, locked herself in her pickup truck, the gun pointed at her own temple. For the next 9.5 hours, the nation was transfixed by the live, televised standoff. A police negotiator spoke with her on a car phone as she wept, ranted, and proclaimed her love for Selena, all while threatening to end her own life. "I can't believe I killed my best friend," she cried, her words broadcast to a horrified public. It was a bizarre public performance of grief and desperation from the woman who had just committed a cold-blooded murder. Finally, as darkness fell, she surrendered to police. The shockwave from Selena's death was immediate and seismic. It was particularly devastating for the Mexican-American community, for whom Selena was so much more than just a singer. She was a symbol of hope, a testament to the power of hard work, family, and cultural pride. She was a young woman who had succeeded in mainstream America without ever abandoning her roots. She had bridged 2 cultures, 2 languages, and 2 worlds, and her fans loved her for it. The public mourning was on a scale not seen since the deaths of Elvis Presley or John Lennon. Tens of thousands of grieving fans descended upon Corpus Christi, holding candlelight vigils outside the Quintanilla family home, her boutiques, and the Days Inn motel. Radio stations across the country played her music non-stop. Her funeral was a massive public event, with an open casket viewing to allow her devastated fans to say a final goodbye. The young woman who had started her career singing at weddings and quinceañeras was now being mourned by the entire world. The dream, which had been on the verge of its most glorious realization, had been brutally, senselessly cut short. The death of Selena Quintanilla did not create a legend. It revealed one that was already there, waiting to be discovered by the rest of the world. In the weeks and months that followed her murder, a phenomenon known as Selena mania swept the nation. The public, shocked and grieving the loss of this incandescent talent, was desperate to connect with her story and her music. In October 1995, the trial of Yolanda Saldívar began in Houston, moved from Corpus Christi due to the intense media scrutiny and concerns that an impartial jury could not be found. The trial was a national spectacle broadcast on court TV. Saldívar's defense team argued that the shooting was a tragic accident, that she had intended to kill herself, not Selena. But the prosecution methodically dismantled this claim, pointing to the 9.5-hour standoff in which she never turned the gun on herself, and the testimony of motel employees who heard her call Selena a bitch after the shooting. After a short deliberation, the jury found Yolanda Saldívar guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. But the true and more poignant final chapter of Selena's career came in July 1995, with the posthumous release of her crossover album, Dreaming of You. The album was a bittersweet triumph. It debuted at #1 on the U.S. Billboard 200 chart, a historic achievement that made Selena the first Hispanic artist to ever do so. It sold over 175,000 copies on its first day alone. The album was a stunning showcase of her versatility, featuring upbeat bilingual dance tracks like I Could Fall in Love and soulful R&B ballads, alongside some of her Spanish-language hits. But the title track, Dreaming of You, became a haunting, unofficial eulogy. Its lyrics about a love that can only be realized in dreams took on a tragic new meaning. The crossover was a monumental success, the culmination of her life's work, but the star herself was not there to see it. Selena's legacy is immense and multifaceted. She is credited with catapulting Latin music into the mainstream American market, proving that Spanish-language music could have massive commercial appeal. She broke down barriers and kicked open the doors for a generation of Latin artists who followed. From Jennifer Lopez, whose career was famously launched when she was cast as Selena in the 1997 biopic, to Shakira, Ricky Martin, and countless others. She proved that an artist could be proudly, unapologetically Latina and still be a mainstream American superstar. Her impact on fashion and beauty also endures. The looks she created herself, the bustiers, the high-waisted pants, the red lipstick, have become iconic and are still emulated by fans and pop stars today. She celebrated a curvaceous, healthy, and distinctly Latina body type, challenging the stick-thin ideal that dominated fashion at the time. Beyond the music and the fashion, her legacy is also one of profound cultural significance. For millions of Mexican Americans, Selena was a symbol of themselves. She was a third-generation Texan who, like many, did not speak fluent Spanish, but embraced her heritage and became a master of its music. She represented the bicultural experience, the ability to navigate and celebrate both American and Mexican identities. Her tragic, senseless death at the hands of someone from within her own trusted circle was a deep and personal wound for the entire community. Unlike many fallen stars, her image has been fiercely protected by her family, particularly her father, Abraham. The Quintanilla family has carefully managed her estate, overseeing the release of posthumous albums, documentaries, and merchandise, ensuring that her memory is preserved in a way that honors her life. While this has led to some criticism of commercialization, it has also kept her story and her music alive for a new generation of fans who were not even born when she died. Selena's story is ultimately one of unfulfilled promise, which is perhaps the most tragic and enduring kind. She was on the absolute verge of global superstardom, a talent so immense and a personality so warm that she almost certainly would have become one of the biggest stars of her generation. A true American icon who had successfully bridged two worlds. Her death wasn't just the loss of a singer, it was the loss of a future, a dream cut short, leaving behind a question that will forever haunt her fans and her family. What if? What if she had never gone to that motel room? What if she had become the global star she was destined to be? We can only dream.